Well, thank you so much for joining me on tonight's edition of This Day.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrew.
I would like first to begin off with what transpired yesterday at State House, where the President did receive the technical committee which he appointed in October to collect submissions from across the country. The committee did submit a report before the President, and in their submission they did indicate that they received over 11,860 submissions countrywide, and that is the second highest during a constitutional making process when it comes to collection of views from the people. I would like first to start from there. What do you make of the decision, first of all, to have appointed a technical committee which went across the country to collect these views from the people?
Well, the decision to appoint the technical committees in itself is correct. Away from who was appointed, the terms of reference, for example, the decision to appoint the committee must be understood as a consequence of the judgment of the Constitutional Court that ordered the government to restart the constitution-making process by ensuring that the exercise was people-driven by an independent body of experts. That's what the court judgment said when it was issued in June. So the President's decision to appoint a technical committee was a response to that judgment, which meant that the government acknowledged the supremacy of that judgment over and above whatever consideration ever existed before the judgment was passed. If you remember, there was a meeting at State House between the President and the civic bodies over the constitutional reform before the ruling was passed. That a day before the judgment, in what many people saw as an attempt to circumvent the ruling, which some say the government knew that was not in their favor, the ruling of the Constitutional Court the following day, the Minister of Justice announced that the bill has been deferred. When the judgment of the Constitutional Court came and said the process that led to the production of Bill 7 was unconstitutional, it meant that everything else that existed before was now null and void. The bill itself was dead because it was a product of an unconstitutional process. So the decision by the President then to proceed to appoint a technical committee was a response to the directives issued by the Constitutional Court to say the process must be people-driven and that there must be an independent board of experts to undertake the exercise of consulting the people. So the decision in and of itself by the President was a fulfillment of that Constitutional Court order. What was problematic was that the committee was given terms of reference that mirrored those that were declared as unconstitutional in terms of the process by the Constitutional Court. You have to understand that the terms of reference that the committee was given, which were proposals that were contained in Bill 7, we don't know where those proposals came from. The government has never explained, say, the Minister of Justice received these proposals from these people or this and that person. They just came from nowhere, and they found expression in Bill 7 ultimately. Now, when you use those proposals as a basis for consultation, that's where the problem begins. Because if you are going to appoint a technical committee, it should not go to the people and say, you are limited in what you want to see changed in the Constitution to these proposals whose origins we don't know. What the committee should have done is to go to the people and ask them, what do you want to see changed in the Constitution? This Constitution has been in operation for the past, 8 years or so, 9 years, since 2016 when it was passed. What are the things that you want to change? And then the committee could have also combined that consultation with the reference to the previous constitutional review commissions to then come up with a report and a draft bill to present to the President to say, here's what the people have said. But by limiting the scope of what the committee could do to what was contained in Bill 7, it meant that the president was essentially seeking to reproduce the same bill using the back door. In essence, what the committee has did over the last few weeks is to go to the people and use that same template whose origins we don't know to say, can you confirm that you support or don't support these things? That's not how constitutional reform must be done, where the government is the one that determines the parameters of what can and should not change. It should be an open and transparent manner where you go to the people and ask them what they want to see change in the constitution. But that's not what we saw. So on the one hand, the president complies with the constitutional court order that said, can you appoint a committee of experts to undertake the consultation nationwide? On the other hand, he proceeds to use the back door to bring back the proposals that were contained in the bill that was declared unconstitutional. He doesn't end there. They prescribe, as government, they prescribe the time within which this committee must undertake its work nationwide. They completed the work within 12 days. And that meant on average that they spent a day in each of the...
But before we can come to the time frame, let's talk about something you've spoken about, Doc. What was wrong with the executive arm of government prescribing those terms of reference to the committee that the president appointed? Was there anything irregular? Was it
proposals whose origins we don't know? You are already prescribing as government that this is what we want to see. But is that what the people want? Why are you limiting? If, for example, I want to say the constitution should require the president to declare assets every year, I want to see that in the constitution. I should have the freedom to make that proposition. And who knows, maybe 1 million other citizens may make the same proposals. Then the committee would go and say, based on the submissions we received extensively from citizens, here are the themes that were consistent in relation to what the people want to see changed. That's how you proceed. You don't limit what people could.
The government argues that the executive arm of government could also move to proceed and amend the constitution. I'd like to find out from you, Dr. Sishiwa. Well, clearly this Bill 7 is driven by the executive arm of government. Is there anything unlawful by the executive driving a constitutional making process?
The constitution is a set of rules that the people give themselves to say, this is how we should govern ourselves, for example. The government is simply the instrument that they use to achieve that objective. So it should always be bottom up, where the people themselves are the drivers of the constitution-making process. That is even what the Constitutional Court judgment itself says, that this must be people-driven, not executive-driven. So by ensuring that the executive is the one that is driving the process, you are disobeying Constitutional Court ruling. We may not like that, the executive may not like that judgment of the Constitutional Court, but they have the obligation to respect it, because the rule of law is based on that principle that even judgments that you don't like, you've got to respect them. The order of the Constitutional Court was clear. The exercise must be driven by the people. By ensuring that what the people could comment upon in terms of what they see change, it meant the exercise was now driven by the executive. It shouldn't be like that. The executive must understand that they themselves are a creation of the Constitution. The people have the final say. In fact, if you look at the Constitution, it simply says the people have the supremacy because whoever is in government, for example, is exercising the power of the people entrusted to them by the people. So if there's any effort to change the Constitution, the correct thing to do is to go back to the people and ask them what they wish to see change in their Constitution, not for the executive to insist that we want to see A, B, C, D change. If that's what the people have told you. It's very important to build consensus when you are changing the Constitution, because the legitimacy of any law lies in the extent to which the people feel that they have a stake, they have participated in its development. The way the government has proceeded, you saw what happened at State House yesterday. It was a contest between us and them. You don't make the constitution that way because the constitution is going to apply to everyone. So what you want to do is to bring together everybody to say, can we come together, discuss, negotiate, and ultimately say, this is what we've agreed with regards to how we should proceed. There's no need to create this kind of groupings where you pit one group against the other because the constitution applies to everyone. It's not like politics where you can have one political grouping over the other. This is a national document. And it's important to build a consensus and bring everybody together and say, can we talk and agree so that once the constitution is enacted, no one feels that
this committee, Doc, was given a very, others would say, limited time to collect submissions across the country, but they did quite an impressive job. This is in accordance to what they're reporting to the president. Yesterday, they did report to the president and said that they did collect over, in fact, the actual figure was 11,860 submissions across the country, and they describe it as the second highest, participatory, constitutional making, process. Do you commend them for this good job they did to ensure that they collect as many submissions as possible?
I don't think the constitution making should be based on numbers to say we have collected 20 submissions or 10,000 submissions. It's really about the process. If the process is flawed from the beginning, it means whatever comes after that is tainted. So the number game, is also misleading because what is the reference point? What did you have a yardstick to say we want to collect, 11,000 submissions? If we do so, then we would have succeeded. If you are going to say 11,000 is a good number, somebody can say, but 11,000 out of how many people would have submitted a potential? It's not even 1 million. It's not even 100,000. People would contest that number and say it's very, very limited. There may be a contest also about some of those submissions because we had the reports that people were being paid to go and make the submissions. And the people who are making this kind of allegations are people from civil society who are monitoring the process. The key thing is not the number. The key thing is how did we get here? Was it in a manner that helps build consensus? No, it wasn't. And that's why the Oasis Forum and other bodies feel left behind because it's like the executive is bulldozing its way and using this numbers game to say, because so many people made submissions, 11,000, then this whole thing is good. No, but this wasn't about having a set target of numbers in terms of submissions. It was about the process to say, how do we proceed in a manner that is holistic, in a manner that doesn't feel like the executive is driving the process, but the people? So it would be a mistake for us to start thinking about the numbers of submissions that were made if we disregard the process, because that process is what determines the content. And that has been the fundamental point of departure for many people in this in relation to the tension between the executive and the Oasis Forum.
Maybe let's put things into their rightful context. Earlier on, you did explain on, the decision of the CON Court that prescribed what must be done if we have to embark on a constitution-making process as a country. And one of the things that the Constitutional Court did prescribe there was that there must be an independent body that must be appointed to go around the country and ensure that people participate. So again, when you speak that the process is flawed, at what point does the process then begin to be wrong when the president was clearly following what was prescribed for in the order of the Constitutional Court judgment?
Well, at multiple levels. The first is the constitution of the composition of the technical committee. When the Constitutional Court, for example, says you should appoint a technical committee, if you read the judgment, they emphasized that there should be an independent body of experts. The committee that was appointed doesn't take experts. Expertism has to do with technical expertise in relation to constitution making. There are few people there who you could say that they are experts, but others they are just supporters of the president. Some of them sat on the technical committee that was appointed by the Electoral Commission of Zambia to undertake a couple of consultations across the country with regard to electoral reforms. So if you look at the reforms in the technical committee as well as what the proposal that came out in Bill 7, they are related. You can't put somebody who was part of that initial committee in this committee to say you should go and take part in the constitution making session. So the composition of the technical committee must have been a result of consensus building. You go to if you are saying you want to include civil society, like the Catholic Church, for example, or the ZCCB, you should go to them and say, can you nominate a representative to come and sit on this committee? They know the expertise of their members much better than the executive or any of us. They could have done that. You go to the Law Association of Zambia and say, can you nominate a representative to come and sit on this committee? They would have done that. You go to the NGOCC, you go to the CCZ, for example, Evangelical Fellowship of Zambia, a number of bodies. On the basis of that consensus, then you would have constituted a committee. You would have also appointed other people who are well-known in constitution making. People like Munan Dulo, for example. He was involved in the making of the Kenyan constitution, one of the constitutions that has been praised generally as one of the best on the continent. Why do you leave him out, for example? So you could have, the government could have been much more intentional in terms of building consensus from the beginning. They didn't. When they appointed people, it's people who are known to be supporters of the president, or who have no linkages with their mother association that they purport to represent. That Catholic priest, for example, from Monza, was appointed. I know he's a friend of the president, but he wasn't nominated by the ZCCB, for example. That's not how you build consensus, because it means from the very beginning, you are pulling in a different direction from the people. So that's one. The other point, of course, to make.
But just there, before you proceed to the other point, Dr. Sishwa, others would argue that this 25-member, technical committee is composed of experts, actually, as opposed to what you're saying, because, for the position of chairperson, we have retired Supreme Court Judge Christopher Mushabati, who comes with a wealth of experience in terms of judicial wisdom and constitutional expertise. We have Dr. Landilani Banda, who also is a lawyer. On the team also, there's His Royal Highness Chief Chamuka and Chief Nyampande, who is part of this, committee. Also, this committee is comprised of, people from the academics, as well as civil society representatives, including Dr. Felicit Kalunga, Douglas Tambulakani, Mr. Ngandwe, also Mr. Isaac Mwanza, who is a governance expert. And so when you say that this committee lacked expertise, would you really point at any among these appointed that you would say lacks the expertise that we need to, for us to proceed with this, process?
Expertise is in relation to a very specific subject. When the Constitutional Court talked about technical expertise, it's in relation to the subject of constitution making. I'm an expert, in history, in political history. You can't appoint me to that committee on the basis that I have expertise in this subject. No, the subject that we are dealing with is constitution making. That chief that you mentioned, for example, what does he know about constitution making? What is his expertise in constitution making? Isaac Mwanza is a known supporter of the authorities. The court order was saying independent. Independent from whom? From the executive. But you are getting supporters of the government and put them there and brand them as experts and independent. They are not. The chiefs should have been, ideally, if at all you are trying to build a commission that is diverse in terms of representation, you go to the institutions where these people come from to ask them to say, can you nominate representatives? That chief is not representing the House of Chiefs because he wasn't appointed by the House of Chiefs. He was appointed by the executive. And I'm saying, that's the first problem in the sense that it's the executive that determines who sit on that committee unilaterally. They would have built consensus from the beginning so that no one feels left behind. They didn't do it. The idea of expertise is very, very particular to technical expertise in relation to the subject at hand, which is constitution making. There's a lawyer there who I think is based on the court, but he's an expert in divorce law. What has that got to do with the constitution? You mentioned Landra Banda. I know Landra. He was here. He did his PhD was on questions of human rights, for example. I know Felicity. Her PhD was in constitutional law at Cardiff. I have respect for Felicity in particular. But if you are going to have 2 or 3 people who have the expertise and you group them with the praise singers, for example, it means that what they are going to produce is dwarfed by the composition of the committee itself. The key point, Andrew, is that from the very beginning, the president could have avoided the challenges or problems we are seeing now, the tension we are seeing now, by being more inclusive and consultative in terms of constituting that committee. They don't lose anything as government by asking Lars, asking the House of Chiefs, asking representatives of civil society to say, can you nominate this representative? That's what his predecessors did. We had the NCC before, by Levi Mwanawasa. They did the same thing. That approach is important to building the consensus that is necessary or required for successful constitution making.
You mentioned a very important point that we must have allowed these institutions to nominate one to represent those institutions. What is the advantage of your proposal over what, for example, the president did just by appointing individuals as opposed to appointing institutions to nominate who was going to represent those institutions on the committee?
I think the advantage is what I it helps in building the kind of consensus that you need to avoid the kind of acrimony that we are seeing now between different groupings, for example. You see, a constitution-making exercise should not be a divisive affair. It should be something that brings us together, because this is a document that should be above partisan considerations. So when you go to these bodies and say, can you nominate, if it's students, for example, and you want students to be represented, you go to their body and say, you know yourselves better in terms of the capacity of your members, the expertise of your members. The Catholics have very, very good people who are well vested in these issues. They could have nominated people to sit on the board. Same thing with the Law Association of Zambia. Same thing with the NGOCC. Same thing with the Evangelical Fellowship of Zambia and the Christian Council of Zambia. This is the board that makes the Oasis Forum the most serious and organized opposition to the constitution-making process that is going on right now. If these bodies had been allowed to participate in the exercise from the beginning, we would have built a kind of consensus that would have prevented the division that we are seeing now. That's one advantage. The other advantage, of course, is that the executive, by stepping back and simply being the facilitator, would have complied with the ruling of the Constitutional Court that said the process must be led by the people. What the executive would have done is to create an enabling law that protects the content that will be provides for the process, as well as protect the content that will have been produced out of such an exercise. There is no need, for example, for the executive to bulldoze its way on the basis that you have given us the power, the ones in charge, and we can determine who sits on this thing. It's not a contest between the people and the executive. There are certain subjects over which we should come together in the country and agree to say this is in our collective best interest. When you take an antagonistic approach such as what we are seeing now, you can't say you are building, you are enacting a law that has public backing or legitimacy. The foundation of the law is legitimacy. Apartheid, if you remember, in South Africa, was law, but it did have legitimacy. It didn't. In the US, for example, at one time, slavery was law. Did it have legitimacy? No, it didn't. There's a need to follow the process. Even when you get married, if I use a common example, you don't just go and grab a woman and say, I can marry you, so come with me, we're going home today. No, there are processes that you want to follow. There's lobola, there are negotiations that take place there to make sure that the families come together. That process is what leads to the wedding. And the marriage itself will be seen as legitimate and sanctified by families on the basis of the process that leads to that wedding. If you simply want to bulldoze your way that I have the money, I have the power, I can marry anybody, even the wife, the woman that you are taking, people will question, say, what kind of a woman is this one who is just grabbed like this just because somebody has the power? That's why I'm saying that approach, if the government had taken it compared to the antagonistic, almost partisan kind of approach we are seeing now, if it had taken that approach, we wouldn't be having this kind of tension. There's need for the government to understand that the tension that is brewing in the country is not good, because there are already huge problems that the country is facing. There's no electricity, there's mass unemployment, there's mass poverty. When you throw in the kind of rhetoric, religiously inspired vision that we saw yesterday at State House, and the president keeps quiet, there has always been this tension between the Catholics and the Seventh-day Adventists, for example. You hear somebody saying the Catholics should have no say on this matter because they don't have children. And the president is there. That's where leadership matters. You stand up and say, I know that you support this process, but you should explain why Bill 7, for example, the proposals contained in them are progressive compared to the other group. Even the other group can lay in that way because you're focusing on the content. But if you focus on denouncing people, you are hastening the tension.
So which direction must we pull in as a country? Because we've got civil society organizations and part of the church that are supporting this bill, and we've got other civil society organizations that are not in support of this bill. You saw what happened yesterday at State House. Several civil society organizations, including union bodies from universities and the church itself, went to State House and openly expressed support for this particular bill. So how must we be pulling as a country now? Because there's one group that is saying yes and the other group which is saying no. How must we proceed forward, Doc?
Well, first of all, it's very important to acknowledge the fact that the people who support the proposals that the government has made in relation to the constitutional reform process must have the right to do what they are doing. They can hold protests, as we saw in Choma, where they came together at short notice and conducted a protest in support of the government position. They have the right. Our constitution provides for the right of peaceful assembly. And I was very happy that the police, the government allowed that protest to continue. It's the way it should be. I should do, just because I'm opposed what the government is doing, doesn't mean that I should prevent other people who support the exercise from expressing that support in a peaceful way. My problem is those protesters who are in support of the government position are enjoying the right to peaceful assembly, while those who are against it are being blocked from exercising that right. That's not right. The police should facilitate the protests, whether pro or anti-government position, for example. What is important as part of our democracy is to have both groups exercise their right to assembly, stating their position, going to State House, for example. If the Oasis Forum wants to go to State House and protest against these constitutional amendment proposals, they should have the right to do so. They should have the freedom to do so. The moment you start allowing one group to protest and prevent the other from doing the same, that's wrong. The way forward, in my view, is not to create this kind of tension between one group and the other. It's for the government to rise above this and say, we are building a national constitution here in terms of the amendment that we are trying to make. We risk leaving these people behind because they also represent a significant constituents of Zambians. You can't simply ignore that opposition and say, we are going to proceed with Bill 7. In my view, what should happen is two things. One, the government should withdraw that bill before the National Assembly, Bill 7, because when the Constitutional Court made a ruling to say the process that produced this thing was unconstitutional, it meant that bill died. When the government appointed the committee to go and consult the people, and then the committee hand the report to the government, what should happen is they should also draft a bill derived coming from that exercise. The people should have access to both the report as well as the bill, so that they can understand the content in that bill and how it relates to the report that was generated. After that bill should be published in the Government Gazette for 30 days, and then it goes to the National Assembly. I'm saying all this not to endorse what has happened so far in relation to the constitutional exercise, but to simply say this is ideally what should happen. Not a scenario where you go and start amending a bill that is before Parliament based on the report of the committee. I don't even think that is provided for in the law. What should happen is almost like forget about Bill 7, whatever you can call it, whether it's Bill 8 or Bill 10. It should be created from the report of the committee, and then you follow the processes that are provided for. Now, the government can take that approach, for example. It still won't be correct because the process that led us here was was non-inclusive. It was executive driven. So one could say it doesn't comply with the ruling of the Constitutional Court in totality. The other way, which is, before I move on to the other point, I should mention that if you have that 30-day requirement, it means this process may drag on into the new year. I understand the government is very keen to make sure that this week they make some progress in relation to the bill before Parliament. If they don't withdraw it, it means they will be resurrecting a dead thing, legally speaking, a dead bill, and then giving it meat based on the reports from the technical committee that was submitted by Randran yesterday. The government seems to be in a hurry to pass this thing before the next elections. If the government wants a proper way forward, is to withdraw the bill before the National Assembly, is to restart the exercise in a manner that builds consensus, and making sure that we don't use the next election as the benchmark to say we have to complete this exercise before the next election. What is the rush for about? No one is going to die just because the Constitution is amended before the election. The Oasis Forum, for example, has said we want the Bill of Rights to be part of the constitution-making process exercise. There's need for to build an holistic approach to this exercise. So if the government is looking for a way forward, which is inclusive, which builds consensus, the first thing to do is to do away withdraw the bill that is before the National Assembly, not to enact a new bill that will simply be Bill 7 renamed in a different way. Because remember, the views which the committee collected were limited to the proposals that were in Bill 7. So even if you are going to produce a new bill and take it to Parliament, it won't be substantially different from what was rejected by the Constitutional Court in terms of how we got there. So the correct thing to do for the government is do away with that bill and don't proceed to introduce a new bill based on the report that was submitted. I know that a lot of money was spent here, but you could actually do away with this thing and restart the process after the election. Now, I know that the government won't do that because they are very determined to push through this constitutional amendment bill for various reasons, including delimitation, which is very much at the heart of this exercise. But ultimately, there's no need for the government to really proceed with this thing because even people who don't like, I don't want to use the word like because the president likes saying hate, using the word hate. Even people who don't support each other, if he actually did step back and say, you know what, this thing is creating division in the country, there's no need to force matters. We are going to do it properly after the next elections. People might actually warm up to him and say, that's leadership. it's not about us and them. It's about all of us building consensus to say this is what we want to change in the constitution in a transparent and open manner. If the president wants and the government wants a good way forward, a good way forward is one that brings people together, not divides them. And I would urge the government to say, can you please abandon this?
You told me just that you listened to the submissions of the civil society organizations, including the church and the student union bodies there. I think their call was very clear that they need their fellow young people to be represented in parliament. In fact, they said that one of the student union leaders says that if she was president for a day, what she could have done is to quickly take the bill to parliament. But also, from the arguments that they are presenting, do you find any reasonable arguments from what they are presenting on the table in regards to why this bill must pull through? Do you think they are presenting a very good arguments on the table why the bill must proceed, go to Parliament, and be enacted into law?
You may have to remind me the arguments that they are advancing, because the ones that I've seen so far are unconvincing, and that's why it's important not to rush this thing, because this discussion about what we like and what we don't like should be part of the national body or the conference, whatever you might call it, where we come together and discuss some of these proposals in an environment that is free from partisanship. If you go to the content of the bill or the proposals that were given to the committee and you scrutinize them individually, you have difficulties convincing me that the problem here is the lack of these proposals in the Supreme Law. We can discuss a few of them. Let's look at the representation argument. So there will be more women, there will be more youths, there will be more people with disabilities, for example. The current constitution provides sufficient, room for the appointing authority to make sure that these groups are represented in decision making. In fact, it says when a person who is empowered to make an appointment to public officers should pay attention to this grouping, for example, as part of building inclusion. Now let's go to the cabinet, for example. Do you have a youth in cabinet of President Hitchens? You don't have a single person who is the youth there. The president is allowed by law to nominate up to 8 people and make them ministers. Not a single one of those nominations was a youth. If you are asking for more, you should demonstrate what you have done with the little that was given to you. You go to people living with disabilities. How many people in cabinet today are people living with disabilities? None. You go to the women. Out of those 8 nominations that the president is allowed to make, how many women did he nominate? 1. I think that was Mutinta Mazong. The rest were women. And you can't say the problem here is the law. No, the problem here is the lack of respect for the Constitution by the president. Because if you respect the Constitution, and if you are committed to building inclusion, you should be able to demonstrate that in the appointment that you have made. To say, here's what I've done so far as a show of respect for the Constitution. But the president hasn't done that. You could also go to permanent secretaries, a couple of other appointments that the president is allowed to make by law, and say, do you see inclusion in terms of these 3 groups there? You can't. So that argument that this is about enhancing the representation of women, of young people, for example, of people living with disabilities is not persuasive on the basis of the evidence that I've just demonstrated. The other point, of course, is this argument that we need to abolish by-elections, for example, whenever they occur, and allow the party that is affected to nominate the replacement. The representative democracy rests on the consent of the people. It's the people who should choose the representative to go and represent them. You can't take that power away from the people and give it to an individual or political organization, say, once this person has died or has been expelled, then the people should lose their right in terms of who they want to represent them. Yes, you might argue that democracy is expensive, but that's a political system we have given ourselves. And it's important not to take away that right to the people, because power is entrusted to these people based on the support that comes from the people. Then you have the idea that we need more nominated member of parliament. Can you tell me what one single problem that we, at the country that you have faced, which comes from the fact that we don't have 2 additional members of parliament, for example? There isn't. The idea that we should have a delimitation. Now, this delimitation thing is actually interesting because when Edgar Lungu, you have to understand that the delimitation report that is being used to talk about the delimitation of constituencies was produced under the PF in 2019. When Edgar Lungu tried to embark on the delimitation of constituencies, the current president, who was the main opposition at the time, opposed that on 2 grounds. He said Lungu was using delimitation to build what he called gerrymandering, build more constituencies and get a political advantage in parliament, build a 2/3 majority in parliament. That was one argument that he made. The evidence is the public domain. The second argument was, he said it is wrong to divide constituencies or delimited constituencies closer to the election. That is what the current president said in opposition when his predecessor tried to embark on this delimitation exercise using Bill 10. Today, the same Hichilema turns around to start doing the very thing that he condemned when it was done by him. And that's why we are questioning this turnaround. I was saying the other day on Twitter, what has happened to the Hichilema that we had in opposition? Because you can't simply turn around without an explanation. Say, how is it possible that something that you so vehemently opposed in opposition is now acceptable? The issue of limitation also has to be seen in relation to why the president wants and the UPND wants to push it. The same reason that actually he gave us in relation to the PF. One for them is that there's this thing of using there's this division between the UPND about the sitting MPs and the challengers in many constituencies in their UPND strongholds. In Choma Central, in Monze, in Kembe, the tension between the incumbent and the challengers. In places like Southern Province, it's almost impossible for the opposition to win a seat there. But it's very easy for an independent who is popular with the people to win as rather for a challenger who is independent, who is popular with the people, to win as an independent candidate if the ruling party doesn't adopt him. We saw many of these MPs like Cornelius Mwetwa, Jack Mwimpu, Gary Kombo, who have been there for a long time, being adopted in the last election. But there was tension at the local level because they thought they should give room for others. So what the president and the UPND are trying to do is to use this delimitation exercise, which they rejected in opposition, to solve that problem by dividing constituencies so that both the current MP and the challenger can be accommodated in terms of their interests. There's nothing wrong in having this kind of internal party competition for adoption. What is wrong is to use those differences to change our national constitution. Then you have the same reason that Hichilema gave us to say delimitation is a way to build a 2/3 majority in parliament, because you look at the constitution, the constituencies that they are planning to delimit, most of them are in the UPND strongholds, for example. You talk about Molovezi, you talk about Kabompo, you talk about so many in Southern Province, for example. Those are safer zones where it's very easy for the UPND to win those new seats if they are created. That means they'll have 2/3 majority in parliament or closer to that. That gives the ruling party, of course, control in the National Assembly. That's what they're trying to do. And that's exactly what Lungu was trying to do also in relation to the delimitation exercise. As Hichilema himself reminded us. Again, that doesn't sound like a convincing explanation based on what Hichilema himself taught us when the PF were trying to do these things. The final reason of delimitation is that there are plans to change the constitutional provision that they don't like term limits. If you remember when Hichilema was Livingstone at that conference, local government conference, he said mayors should support the removal of term limits on mayors and I think council chairperson, because if a leader is good, it should not be limited by term limits. It should be limited by the people. That thinking is dangerous at two levels. First, it suggests that it undermines the spirit of representative democracy, because no matter how good you are, there can be no shortage of good leaders to replace you in the society. That's why the people put up those term limits to make sure that there's room for leadership renewal every after 5 years or maximum 2 5 years. Then the other point, of course, is if you are going to remove term limits on mayors and the council chairperson, it means out of the 5 elected positions that we have in Zambia today, that is councillor, council chairperson, mayor, member of parliament, and the president, there will only be one position that will remain with term limits. So currently, you have 3 positions that have term limits: the president, the council chairperson, and the mayor. The other 2, which is the MP and councillor, that don't have term limits, are the anomaly. So the correct thing to do is to make sure that those two positions don't have term limits, and they are changed so they can have term limits there to make them consistent with the majority 3 position. But what the president is proposing with his friend, the UPND, is that we should do away with term limits on the 2 out of 3 positions that we have. What that means that after this bill passes, were it to pass, there will only be one position that will remain with term limits. The plan is to make sure that then you can exert pressure after the aftermath of the passage of this bill and at the election to say, why should we only have one term limits on one office when the other 4 don't have term limits? Discriminatory, can we remove term limits on the presidents as well? What does that do? It creates room for muyaya, where a person stands repeatedly until death or until he has identified a planned successor. And you can see that even the limitation in that sense then is a power grab. It's a way to institutionalize the dominance of the ruling party in parliament for purposes of making further changes to the constitution. We can go on, but many of these proposals that we are seeing are entirely self-serving, and that's why it was important to go to people and ask them, what is it that you want to change in the constitution, rather than to limit them to these proposals whose origins we don't know.
As we conclude, I read your article on why you think, part of the main reasons why you think the executive wants to proceed, or President Hakainde Hichilema wants to proceed to see this happen. One of the things that you mentioned was delimitation. But Doc, others are stating that you must be very sincere on delimitation, because delimitation is provided for by law, and that it is the duty of the Electoral Commission of Zambia to draw these boundaries every after 10 years, and that the UPND are within the time frame that they need to delimit it. And so surely would it be fair to suggest that the reason for why this whole process must go ahead is because the UPND want delimitation as a matter of life and death, when in fact it's a constitutional provision, and whether Bill 7 or without Bill 7, they are supposed to delimit it?
I don't think people are opposed to the delimitation exercise if it's done in a transparent and impartial manner. And the first step that should be taken when you are doing delimitation in an impartial and transparent manner is to release the delimitation report so that people can read for themselves what constituencies were identified in the previous exercise for division. The PF and Edgar Lungu refused to release that report. Hichilema, who was elected on a ticket of transparency, is refusing to release that report. I don't understand the secrets surrounding the delimitation report, because it's being done in the name of the people. Why are you concealing it from the people? Release it so that people can understand the constituencies that are earmarked for delimitation. If you remember, one of the terms of the committee was to go and talk to the people about constituency delimitation. How do you ask the people to support delimitation when they don't know the constituencies that are to be delimited, for example? What people are opposed is the politicization of this exercise. The same way that Hichilema opposed it when it was done by PF, in the same way people are standing up to him and say, please, First of all, can you release this report so that we understand which constituencies have been earmarked for delimitation? When you look at Article, I think, 259, in terms of the factors that have to be considered when delimiting a constituency, it's the issues of population density. But the argument that we are hearing from the UPND is that delimitation should happen because some constituencies are too big or they are vast. That's not a constitutional basis for delimitation. A constituency may be big, but with very few people. Maybe Andrew Shua are the only ones who are living in that constituency. Why should it be cut into two? Because it's too big. When you only have people, compared to constituents like Mandevu, for example, Lusaka or Matero. If we are going to go by the constitutional requirements, it is Lusaka, it is Copperbelt, it is Eastern Province that should have more new constituencies created because the population of these provinces is very high. It's the highest if you look at the 2022 census reports. But what we are seeing, what we are hearing are constituencies to be delimited are constituencies outside, mainly outside Lusaka, mainly outside the Copperbelt, mainly outside the Eastern Province. It's constituencies like Iteji in Southern Province, Chirundu in Southern Province. In fact, in the write-up that you referred to, I put Chirundu and Iteji in different provinces because when we check the parliamentary website, where I got my information from, it lists Iteji as part of the constituencies in Central Province. It lists Chirundu as part of the constituencies in Lusaka Province. So I used official figures, but it turned out that Ichirema took those two constituencies back where Michael Sata grabbed them, took them from, which is Southern Province. And so Southern Province has 20 constituencies. Lusaka, Southern Province has 2.3 million people. Lusaka with 3 million people, over 3 million people, has 12 constituencies. Western Province, which is a third of the population of Lusaka, has 19 constituencies. Lusaka has 12 constituencies. It can't be that then you want to go to Western Province and say, we want to create more constituencies in this Western Province that is at only a third of Lusaka's population, for example. And that's why I was saying that this argument for size doesn't hold water. Because then you could even make the argument that Zambia is too big to be administered by one president. We need 10 presidents to make sure that we have a president per province. The guiding issue should be the constitution. And if it's population dynamics or population density, then it means presidents like Lusaka should be the ones to have more constituencies together with Copperbelt and Eastern Province based on the new census report that you have generated in 2022. Then you heard the president saying, the previous delimitation exercises were discriminated. What he meant is that the provinces where he comes from, he likes crying discrimination, President Ichilem. The president where he comes from, Southern, Western, Northwestern, Central, were discriminated against in previous efforts. Now, if you go back into history, you go to 1964, Zambia had about 75 constituencies, more than 6 in parliament. 65 of those were direct constituencies. 10 were elected by were nominated by the president. That changed to 105 in 1967. It rose to 125 in 1973 and 150 in 1991. The next constitution, the next constituencies to be created didn't happen until 2016, when you had 6 constituencies that were created. If you look at the concentration of the current constituencies in parliament, you have about 66 constituencies in areas or provinces that you regard generally as UPND strongholds. And those like Eastern, Muchinga, Northern Wapula have very fewer constituencies if you take away the urban provinces of Copperbelt and Lusaka. So the argument that these provinces received favoritism from previous leaders in terms of how constituencies were created is actually the other way around. If each of them must pronounce himself here, is to thank the predecessors before him, who made sure that by structure, the region where he comes from has more concentration of constituencies than the other side, where he claimed that his predecessors were favored. Even the last set of constituencies to be created, which were created in 2016, there were about 6. If you look at those 6 where they are located, they're actually in the UPND stronghold. There was Rufuvu in Central Province. That's the province that has generally voted for the UPND. Then you have Sinda in Eastern Province. You have Chembe in Ruapula. You have Nkeema and Sioma in Western Province. And Chirundu in Southern Province. So 4 of the 6 are actually UPND strongholds, for example. How is it possible for the president then to stand up and make a claim that the previous exercises were discriminatory when actually the region that has benefited greatly in terms of constituency concentration is the region where he comes from? So that's why I'm saying that this delimitation is a good thing if it's not politicized. But the important thing at the first step towards transparency is to publish the report, to say, here is the report that was generated by the PF in 2019, and here's what they said. Why are they hiding that report? It's almost as if they want to doctor it. I can release it today, for example, because I've had sight of it. But I'm waiting to see if when they release it, they would have doctored it so they can tell them. I'm sure even the PF who generated it and the officials at the time can come up and say, no, but that's not what was recommended in the report. The correct thing for the government to do is first, you get the delimitation report out, give it to the people, and let the people decide and discuss to say, no, Mandevu is too big. We want it to be delimited. But if you are just focusing on Chongwe, on Kafue, on Kanyama, I'm told they want to make Kanyama Makeni East and Makeni West, on Chilanga, for example, then people start thinking, why are you picking these provinces that look like these are provinces that where the UPND is going to do well? Why are you leaving out Lusaka Central? Why are you leaving out Mandevu? Why are you leaving out Matero? Why are you leaving out the constituencies? So many of the people that need to be limited or others elsewhere. That's why it's very, very central that the government should be transparent in this matter by making sure that they release that report as the first step towards generating a national conversation on the kind of delimitation exercise that should take place.
Prominent historian Dr. Joshua, thank you so much for making the time.